Power spots. The occurrence of this card may indicate a need to be in a place of power and vision, and or a place with high social opportunities, resources, and opportunities. British biologist James Lovelock, formerly with NASA, won a Nobel Prize for his Gaia hypothesis, which basically states that the Earth functions as a superorganism. Complex organisms like the human body have highly differentiated structures. It is very different, for example, to have an ant crawl across a toenail than the cornea of your eye. The spherical body of Gaia has a differentiated structure as well, and some parts of its surface seem to be power spots comparable to acupuncture meridians or chakra locations on our bodies that are associated with energy vortices. Monument Valley is a place that should convince anyone with an ounce of sensitivity that power spots are real, and it's roughly in that Four Corners area, um, where you can find many other power spots as well. And I live in Boulder, Colorado. I was born in the Bronx for a reason. It's a power spot for me. It's socially, um, but also geomantically in some way. I like the high altitude lighting in the mountains and all of that kind of thing. In the last few days of his life, someone asked Timothy Leary what, now that he was at the edge of the grave, he would advise people. And I'm not a Timothy Leary fan. He was a toxic narcissist in a lot of ways. But he said, be careful where you film the movie of your life. Choose the part of the body of Gaia you live on as wisely as possible. Sometimes it's valuable to make a pilgrimage to a power spot or to relocate to one indefinitely. Other times, it may be ideal to make your own power spots on the imaginal plane within, like if you can't control where you are. Maybe you're in prison. There is a powerful practice called theater of memory, an ancient practice where you build a walled estate in your mind and then meticulously construct a castle um, within that walled estate where you can live if you want or create different rooms. And two different survival documentaries I saw showed that this was a kind of archetypal spiritual practice in that um, different survivors had all come upon the same solution to maintaining their sanity. Like one guy was in a Soviet psychiatric hospital where they would put political prisoners and torture them with Thorazine and electroshock treatments. But this guy survived psychologically intact for like 25 or 30 years in one. And they asked him how he did it. And he said, I just built this castle in my mind, and that's where I would hang out and go to sleep. And then, and three or four other survivors, because I've studied survival a bit, came up with the same strategy. Like one was a very not very imaginative guy, a kind of Joe Sixpack kind of guy. It was an American POW. And what he did was he spent all his time designing a second home for his family and thought about like how many 2x4s, how many 10-penny nails would he need, and like designing it down to every detail so meticulously that when he was rescued from being a POW, he then built that exact house for his family. So if you cannot control where you are, try building an estate in your mind. And this is a kind of a Swiss Army knife of spiritual tools. It does many powerful things. It solidifies your imagination, giving it a certain permanence where if you create things, they should be the same when you come back the next day unless you change them. It will be a whole long talk to go into the many virtues of theater of memory. But this is something you can do if you can't control your space. If you're not living in the right town, then maybe you can at least decorate and soundproof your living space to make it a power spot within a distracting environment, or to or if all you have is your imagination, you can make your sanctuary within that space. Power spots may be places you go for a time or where you choose to live. Power spots may be man-made sacred spaces such as Gothic cathedrals or the Great Pyramids, or they may be geologically powerful places like Monument Valley or the Grand Canyon. They may also be socially intensive temporary zones like festivals. So it could be that Burning Man or Rainbow Gathering, or whatever your favorite festival is a power spot for you. And that's especially because of the social advantages of being in such an environment. I like to visit and to live in what I call mutant intensive environments. In plainer English, places where there are more individualized and culturally creative people. For example, I grew up in New York City and now I live in Boulder, Colorado. These locations have more social opportunities, resources, and opportunities than, for example, you might find in a dying Rust Belt town. You are more likely to meet someone interesting at a temporary mutant intensive environment like Burning Man or a Rainbow Gathering than at a random Walmart at 11 o'clock on a Monday morning. It is not only that certain festivals self-select more interesting people, mixed in with plenty of drainbows and trendy posers and annoying Burning Man people and so forth, but also that social boundaries are more open at festivals than at Walmarts. And by the way, you can find me at some of these festivals doing free dream interpretation and oracle readings. Step off camera for a second. This is what I do at festivals. And a lot of my closest friends I've met that way. So look for me wearing that sign at Burning Man or the National Rainbow Gathering and a few other festivals, which will be announced like usually on my Facebook page or something. Anyway, I've had a number of misanthropic friends tell me that they want to live in remote rural areas to get away from people. I usually challenge them. So where will the next significant romantic relationship come from? And what if you have a medical catastrophe? Would you prefer to live close to state-of-the-art medical services or wait for a neighbor to drive you 30 miles in a pickup truck to the barber shop for an emergency surgery? These are all very personal choices. I don't see myself ever living in a big city like New York again, but I also don't want to self-isolate in the woods. Boulder is my Goldilocks zone, a geologically powerful high desert nestled beneath the Flatiron Mountains with glorious high-altitude lighting and ever-changing mountain weather. It's a major university and college town with lots of cultures, medical services, social opportunities, superb restaurants, and giant health food stores. And it's like the best educated and most physically fit town. And, that kind of thing affects you. They say your friends, the BMI of your friends is more influential on your BMI than your relatives. So living in a place where I guess the only problem in Boulder is so many people look like Olympic athletes, or so many Olympic athletes train here that it can make an older person like me feel self-conscious. But it's better to be around healthy people, healthy restaurants, people who are modeling healthy lives than to be in a place where that's not happening. And so I feel positively influenced by the kind of, it's kind of a go-getter type place. There aren't many people like just slacking about and like doing white powder drugs, behind the scenes and this kind of thing, which is something that you can feel in a number of other places. And so you can kind of feel that deadbeat zeitgeist kind of sucking you in and giving you this like why bother feeling. And so I would notice this very strongly when I used to live out of an 18-foot RV. And I would go to different locations and I had blackout curtains. So when I woke up in the RV, everything looks exactly the same, whether I was in Boulder or, for example, when I would go and spend a week in Fort Collins, Colorado, a similarly sized town, another big university town. I could wake up and feel that I was in Fort Collins, that the zeitgeist was different. It was less narcissistic than Boulder, less glitzy, but that it was humbler, it's more Western in a traditional sense, but it also had less brilliance than Boulder, less like super imaginative talent. So these are kind of like zeitgeist differences that I can pick up in different places, even if I'm not getting immediate visual information of that. Like it's very different waking up, even if I'm not hearing anything, waking up in my Sprinter van at a big festival than waking up in my Sprinter van in a Walmart parking lot where I also camp out quite often during my travels, going from one place to another, because they allow home vehicle parking in Walmart parking lots, in case you don't know. So, unfortunately, like New York City, Boulder has high rents and home prices, but you often get what you pay for with places these days. It's one of the things that makes scenes hard to come by, like, Paris in the 30s. And there were earlier great scenes in New York. My dad, who lived like, except for World War II, 93 years in the Bronx, talked about how he thought New York was much more interesting and had more scenes in like the 40s and 50s when he was a big time socialist and going to Columbia and stuff like that. In the rare, okay, and people kind of think that the New York of the present era in which I'm recording this card, 2024, is kind of a very dead era of the city, where people had, trying to have a scene like we used to have in the, well, I'll just read it from the text here. In the rare occasion that a place turns into a scene, it gets gentrified and expensive until more bohemian folks get priced out and the scene vanishes. I got to live in an intense scene in the early to mid 80s, the East Village, when it was the most intense art and music scene on the planet and the punk capital of the world. I lived in a tiny apartment that was $350 a month, and many punks squatted in abandoned buildings in Alphabet City. Then it gentrified and the scene disappeared. Now new scenes popped up in Brooklyn until they got gentrified and moved to more affordable Brooklyn neighborhoods, from like Williamsburg to Bushwick and so on and so forth. The point is that mutant-intensive environments, especially festivals and scenes, are temporary zones, so you need to be mobile if you want to be part of them. Boulder is my home base, but in ever advancing age, despite ever advancing age, I guess everybody's age is ever advancing, but mine is right over there, because I don't believe in age denialism. 66. People say that I could pass for a 62-year-old who hasn't slept in a couple of days, but that is my age. I'm using some age advancing filters, I should say, when I do these videos, so people will take me more seriously, because otherwise I would just look too young and glamorous to be believable as an oracular sage. Anyway, the point is that mutant-intensive environments, especially festivals and scenes, are temporary zones, so you've got to be mobile if you want to meet up with any of those. And that's why I spend 25% of the year living out of my Sprinter van, even though I've got a nice house in Boulder. And for more than 20 years before I had that house, I was economically marginal, and I split my time between Boulder, being on the road, and living out of an 18-foot RV with some visits to check on my parents in the Bronx and staying at their house and that kind of thing. Try not to get stuck in stagnant, mediocre places lacking in social opportunities and other key resources. Consider this an auspicious time to seek out power spots. And for more on power spots, you can see my document or YouTube, same YouTube channel, called Incendiary Person in the High Desert Carnival, a surreal travelogue of my first Burning Man experience, and also a study of the light and dark of festival culture. Power spots can be hard to take on in the abstract. Essential reading to see them embodied. Essential reading for a lot of things, in my opinion, is my sci-fi fantasy epic, Parallel Journeys. Now, I'm not selling anything. You can read this beautifully displayed right here on this website. But if you prefer a physical version like this, you can get it on Amazon. The Audible version you can get on Audible. I think that's actually the best version. I performed it. Anyway, but you will see power spots, including festivals, portrayed in that work. And also some geological power spots. Anyway, as Timothy Leary said, be careful where you film the movie of your life.